So my name is Logan Malik, and I'm the Clean Energy Director here at the Massachusetts Climate Action Network. I am so grateful that you all are taking time out of a gorgeous evening today to join us and to learn a little bit more about winter reliability and the need for clean solutions. We have two wonderful and deeply knowledgeable experts joining us today who hopefully will help to explain a little bit about kind of what the winter reliability challenges are and how we can incorporate clean solutions into our winter reliability approach. And so just before we get started on the official agenda, I want to just, I have a little bit of housekeeping. First and foremost, you should have come in muted, but in case you didn't, please just make sure that you are muted for the duration of the presentation. If you haven't already, please do share your name and your town in the chat and where you're calling from. We love to know who is joining us and their organizational affiliation, if they care to share. As you know, we will be recording this webinar. It is already recording, so if you don't feel comfortable with your video on, please do turn that off now. And it shouldn't be an issue either way, but we want to make sure that you are comfortable. A little bit about MCAN. We were founded in 2000, and we are a nonprofit organization with now over 65 chapters across the state. We view our role as a facilitator of municipal level action and really working to empower our local chapters by enhancing communication, promoting town level projects that improve communities, and supporting local efforts that combat the climate crisis. For us, it's all about local action. We believe that local action is where all good policy starts. And then it's our job and it's the job of others to raise that local action, that great policy to the statewide level, and then also ensure that it is working and that our regional systems are working in favor of that statewide action. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So our agenda is jam-packed, and hopefully there's a lot of good information for you. First, we're going to talk a little bit about, just to make sure that we are all on the same page, what is ISO New England, our regional grid operator, and why should we care about it? And then we're going to really talk mainly about, get into the meat of the subject today. We're going to talk about winter reliability issues in ISO New England, in the region, and where things currently stand there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about clean energy solutions to winter reliability and to the increasing concerns around winter reliability, especially as we transition our grid to clean technology. Then I will briefly just address how advocates, residents, and other interested folks can continue to stay involved and continue to learn more about the grid and these issues. And talk a little bit about kind of why that's important. We will finish up with a Q&A that I will facilitate, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to address some of the questions that arise as we go through this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in and talk a little bit about what is ISO New England and why should we care about it. So ISO New England is an independent system operator. It's also known as a regional transmission organization. It is a nonprofit company that was authorized to exist and to carry out its various different responsibilities by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It serves the 6 states in New England. So it serves Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. And that is important to note because, it is not regulated by states. It is certainly influenced by states. It's influenced by the interests and the goals that states have, but it is not directly regulated by states. It is instead regulated by FERC, by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. ISO New England essentially exists to serve three primary roles in our energy system. So the first role that it plays is grid operation. It is the entity that coordinates and directs the flow of electricity across the region's transmission system. So it is the one who is actually moving the energy back and forth. It's the one that's primarily responsible for that transmission and for ensuring that energy gets to where it needs to go. The second role that it plays is market administration. So ISO New England is responsible for designing, running, and overseeing the billion-dollar and multi-billion-dollar markets that specifically deal with the buying and selling of wholesale electricity. And so this is a big role and something that we've been learning a whole lot about and discussing a lot about. But these markets, and I'm not going to get too in depth with them, include the energy market, the capacity market, and the ancillary services market. And this is kind of where all of the energy in the wholesale electricity is purchased and sold. And ISO New England is responsible for designing, running, and overseeing those markets. The third and final primary responsibility that ISO New England has is they are responsible for power system planning. So they do studies and analyses and analyze and plan to make sure that they're meeting electricity needs for all of the New England states over the long term. And that includes considering the evolution of our electric grid and our electricity system, in the short term as well as in the long term. So as you can see, and hopefully as I've been able to convey, these are big responsibilities, and these have significant implications on states' capacities to do anything when it comes to energy. Before I kind of talk directly about that, I do just want to zoom out a little bit and share with you, kind of how ISO New England fits into the broader picture. So ISO New England is one of many regional transmission organizations across the country that serves either regions or states. And you can see, if you look at the California ISO, that mainly serves just California. But others like ISO New England serve a number of states. So if you look at Southeast and the Northwest, and this again just shows the picture of kind of what states and regions is ISO New England serving currently, and is it performing those roles and responsibilities that I outlined for. So why do we care about this? Why is this important? As I outlined, they have a whole bunch of responsibility when it comes to looking at the future of our energy system, and when it comes to looking at how we transition our energy grid. The policies, priorities, and day-to-day operations of ISO New England play a significant role in determining the speed of the energy transition. The decisions that they make and that their operations decide how much renewables come online, or I would say maybe not decide, but significantly influence how much renewable energies come online. It influences the speed with which fossil fuel plants and fossil fuel generation is retired and no longer is utilized, and it also influences how our energy needs are met just on a day-to-day basis. What is prioritized, and how is it kind of being utilized on the market. So when we think about climate action, sometimes we have a tendency to focus just on state policy, but the reality is we cannot effectively move to a just and clean energy future without paying attention to what ISO New England is doing and what their policies, priorities, and day-to-day operations are looking like. And this kind of spans across a vast number of issues. There are a whole bunch of issues that are worth considering and that we need to be focused on. And one of those is winter reliability. It is clear that this is becoming an increased topic of discussion, an increased concern, and something that we believe is very much so worth paying attention to, both as we look to this upcoming winter and as we look towards future winters. And so with that, I am going to introduce Melissa, who's going to talk a little bit about ISO New England and about this issue of winter reliability specifically. Melissa Birchard is the Director of Clean Energy and Grid Reform at the Acadia Center. Her work focuses on accelerating the development and integration of clean energy and building a clean electric power grid, including regional power grid reforms at ISO New England level. Before joining the Acadia Center, Melissa worked as an attorney representing clean energy companies, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies on various different issues, including clean energy policy and regulatory matters. And that was before both state public utility commissions throughout the country, as well as in front of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. She holds a JD from the Georgetown Law Center, a master's degree from UCLA, and a bachelor's degree from Bryn Mawr. And with that, I will go ahead and let you take it away, Melissa.
Thank you so much, Logan. I'm glad to be part of the discussion today and enjoyed that introduction. As Logan said, my name is Melissa Birchard, and I am Director for Clean Energy and Grid Reform at Acadia Center. We can go ahead to the next slide, please. Thanks. Acadia Center is a nonprofit organization with offices across New England. Our mission is to advance bold, effective, and equitable clean energy solutions in the Northeast states. We do this through policy advocacy, technical analysis, and partnerships with diverse organizations, as well as communities across the Northeast. Next slide, please. The topic today, as Logan said, is the reliability of the region's electric grid and the role that clean energy can play in making the grid more reliable so that we experience fewer major electricity outages. This challenge gets harder, of course, as climate change gets worse, because it makes more severe and unpredictable weather, which increases the potential for outages. First, we'll take kind of a high-level look at New England's electric grid now and some of the reliability challenges it faces. Then we'll talk about how to make the grid both cleaner and more reliable at the same time. As Logan mentioned, ISO New England is the organization authorized by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, to operate the region's electric grid, as well as to manage its interstate electricity markets. As an initial matter, it's important to understand that ISO New England sees maintaining the reliability of the electric grid as its absolute #1 priority. And ISO New England currently sees a central role for fossil fuels in maintaining reliability for years to come. This slide shows a graphic that ISO New England published last winter, explaining essentially what the risks of blackouts on the electric grid could be under 3 different winter weather scenarios. So they said that everything would be fine if the winter brought mild weather. That's the little sunny image at the top. If the weather were moderately cold, like the winter of 2017 to 2018, then they believed there was a limited possibility that they might need to employ the least impactful type of grid preservation measures, such as ramping up demand response or calling for voluntary conservation. And that's that middle one with the little temperature gauge. If the weather was particularly cold, like it was in the winter of 2013 to 2014, then ISO New England said they might need to deploy a wider range of emergency measures, such as rolling blackouts across the region, in order to keep the electric grid as a whole from going down. So that's the bottom one with the little snowflake. ISO New England started issuing these kinds of winter weather alerts with these three different scenarios after the winter crisis in Texas that resulted in major grid outages and also resulted in substantial loss of life. ISO New England sees this as a way of communicating to the public about the risk of outages. Although they have received a number of criticisms for this particular communications approach. For example, some folks say ISO New England has a tendency to cry wolf when there is no real threat. So last winter they issued this and there was no real problem, right? Some people see this as a way to perhaps gin up support for more fossil fuel infrastructure, or possibly to protect themselves from liability in the event that something unexpected does happen. Other folks say these alerts are clear as mud, and that in any event, there's no way to meaningfully respond to an alert like this. Still, others say that if every year there is a risk of blackouts, then ISO New England should be a lot more proactive in reducing that risk permanently. And that's certainly one of the things that the states have been voicing. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of New England's electric grid taken from the ISO New England website just this morning. So I share this to highlight the over-reliance of our electric system on natural gas. The baby blue portion of the total fuel mix graphic on the left shows that almost 70% of New England's electricity was generated using natural gas at that moment in time. On average, New England's electric grid relies on gas for around 50% of its electricity generation every year. Now, that fact carries a number of implications. First, as Logan mentioned, there are important climate goals in each of the states and across the region, and we cannot reach those climate goals without phasing down emissions from fossil gas. Second, for reliability purposes, that is simply a lot of eggs in one basket. The most reliable electric system is generally one that has a diverse portfolio of resources that have complementary benefits. So an example might be solar that is strong in the daytime, wind that is strong in the nighttime, combined perhaps with hydroelectricity and flexible battery storage for the ability to meet additional needs. When you have that kind of more diverse energy portfolio, supply constraints, outages, and other concerns that could come up with a single resource are less likely to result in major impacts. This also relates to price. So right now we're seeing electricity utility bills going up dramatically because of this over-reliance on a fossil fuel that is part of an international commodities market that can, as we see, it can be volatile. If we had a more diverse energy mix, consumers would certainly be better insulated from those kinds of price fluctuations. Next slide, please. This is another graphic from ISO New England's website. It shows the resources that the grid relies on in New England to generate electricity on those cold winter days. The baby blue portion of the mix here, which is the gas, is shown getting smaller on really cold days. There are a number of reasons for this, the most obvious being that on cold winter days, it's cold and New England homes need more gas for heating. There are other reasons also why gas and gas-fired generation is not always readily available. And this winter, this coming winter, an extra causal factor could be the war in Ukraine, which is causing supply challenges and price spikes. Next slide, please. So this slide shows US exports of natural gas. During the first 4 months of this year, the US exported more than twice as much liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to Europe than it did during the first quarter of 2021. As you know, Russia's war against Ukraine is the reason for this. It's certainly not the first time that fossil fuel prices have spiked, and gas prices were rising even before Russia's invasion. But Russia's aggression has had major impacts. Whereas renewable energy tends to be place-based and relies on free fuel from the sun and wind, Fossil fuels like oil and gas are part of international commodities markets that are tied to global events. And as a result, both pricing and access to supply can be volatile. New England, however, does depend on liquefied natural gas or LNG to help fire its gas-fired power plants. Next slide, please. Thanks. Because of this unique situation with international instability and market impacts, including elevated international competition for LNG supplies, ISO New England decided recently to take a special look at reliability risks for the electric grid for this coming winter, 2022 to 2023. At first, ISO New England's CEO raised the major concerns about the upcoming winter at a public conference. Those statements then prompted representatives from the New England states and other stakeholders to ask for more information. ISO New England then went and collected information and finally sent a PowerPoint presentation to stakeholders and the states that actually appears to find that the risks this winter do not look as bad as ISO New England had initially worried they might be. Now, this conversation is still ongoing, but that's what we're hearing at this point. So ISO New England investigated the possibility of launching one of its winter reliability programs, such as has been run in the past or will be run in the future, and decided ultimately that those measures were not necessary. Next slide, please. Slide is taken directly from the ISO New England PowerPoint that I mentioned that was just issued. The PowerPoint presentation has not actually been delivered yet. It's due to be delivered tomorrow at a stakeholder meeting. So events are still unfolding, but you can see the conclusions here. The bullet at the bottom is, I think, especially important because it refers to the need for longer term solutions. So even to the extent that there may not be a short-term emergency, there's still this laser focus on reliability and the longer-term solutions. There is a big question as to whether those longer-term solutions will be fossil fuel-based or whether they might be clean reliability solutions. The two winter reliability programs that ISO New England evaluated during its kind of scare there and then apparently rejected for this year were both programs primarily focused on ensuring the availability of extra fossil fuels like fuel oil. Next slide, please. Thanks. This is a published quote of Gordon Van Wheely, ISO New England's CEO. Here, he describes what he sees as a major reliability challenge for the electric grid. And one of the things he says he is particularly concerned about is periods of time when renewables like solar or wind can't produce. So the ISO New England PowerPoint that was published this week also mentioned the potential need for, and I quote, decisions outside of ISO New England's authority, such as non-electric infrastructure. Now, there is a concern that this could refer to the need for more gas pipelines, this non-electric infrastructure. If that is what it means, of course, gas pipelines would take many years to build, cost someone, most likely consumers, a lot of money. And they are also strongly counterindicated by the region's climate goals. Sorry, it looks like the printing came out a little funny there, but next slide, please. Thank you. This slide shows a number of the clean energy solutions that could be used to shore up the reliability of the electric grid in order to help reduce or eliminate the risk of blackouts during cold winters with severe weather. Now, the most basic one is simply more diversity. There are certain conditions, including supply challenges, that can cause a whole lot of fossil fuel fired power plants to go offline at the same time. Just as there are known conditions that will cause a whole lot of solar farms to stop producing at the same time. Because each energy type does come with its own set of risks, the best way to reduce those risks is more diversity. Right now, the grid relies on gas for about 50% of its overall electricity generation, as we saw in those charts. which is arguably too much for any single resource, particularly one that has to be imported and is subject to international market fluctuations. In contrast, the more complementary renewables we can deploy, like wind and solar, which as I mentioned, can also be paired with sources like hydroelectricity and storage, then the more we can create a grid that is at the same time clean and reliable. So to be clear, I do want to say, wind alone and solar alone won't make the grid nearly as reliable as wind and solar together. It's really a matter of getting the right portfolio. So solar is strong in the daytime and in the summer, whereas wind is strong in the nighttime and in the winter. So we do need to deploy both of those in kind of complementary volumes. Now, the next item on the list is demand management. And that's when we turn consumer demand into a grid resource. It's a super important, inexpensive, very valuable resource. This will be increasingly important as New England starts to see a lot of, electric Ford F-150s, because we can use resources like electric cars, trucks, and buses, including school buses, to help reduce demand on the grid. And in some cases, they can even generate electricity for the grid. The last one on the list is energy storage. Todd is going to talk more about that. So I would just mention it real briefly here as one of the key clean energy tools that can help improve the reliability of the electric grid. Next slide, please. I want to just throw in two very quick examples of novel options to use clean energy to help improve the reliability of the electric grid. And this is one example from California, where residential rooftop solar paired with batteries can be aggregated together to provide emergency support for the electric grid when it has special needs. So these aggregated residential resources are bundled together in what's called a virtual power plant. I think Todd will talk about similar programs in New England, which are being used right now to reduce peak load on the electric system in the summer. So they're helping the grid, but they're not currently being used for that purpose in the winter when they could also potentially be valuable. Next slide, please. And here's the second example that I just wanted to throw up there, which is an electric school bus pilot in Beverly, Massachusetts. And this one used batteries in electric school buses to discharge electricity from the buses to the electric grid. In fact, shifting the time of charging electric vehicles by itself is a form of demand management and can benefit the electric grid. But this particular program took a step further and provided what's called vehicle to grid services. So this is another type of clean reliability option. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide lists kind of a to-do list or a wish list for those of us who want to see an electric grid that relies on clean energy to maintain reliability instead of just relying on fossil fuels. So first, we need electricity markets that promote and compensate clean reliability resources. So right now, ISO New England's markets actively discriminate against clean energy, contrary to state policy, and they also this is also contrary to the need to bring on more clean reliability resources. So, ISO New England will say, well, we don't have those. This is one of the reasons we don't have them. We don't have the right incentives in place in the markets. Second, we need the states and ISO New England to coordinate more and to take better advantage of flexible load resources like the residential devices I was talking about. Right now, we aren't taking nearly enough advantage of those clean and inexpensive resources that can help the grid. And as more and more of those residential technologies come online, including heat pumps and electric vehicles, and those fancy trucks, the more important it will be for the grid to be able to use those resources. They can also rely on the grid, but the grid can rely on them conversely. So third on the list, kind of an extension of that, we need to run some more pilots for some of these types of programs, but most of all, we really need to start scaling up programs, such as those that take better advantage of solar plus storage, heat pumps, and electric vehicles. We need to get it done. Fourth, we need to build a clean electric grid, and that requires transmission lines. Now, no one likes transmission lines, but without them, we can't connect resources like offshore wind to consumers. So transmission lines are also a prerequisite for a clean and reliable electric grid. Finally, although there may be more things I have listed here, we also need to reduce the time that it takes to connect clean energy to the electric grid. This is a big issue. It's called interconnection. Right now, it's a messy, lengthy, multi-part process that involves all sorts of people, and it really slows down the process for clean energy and frankly discourages clean energy developers from coming into the region. So, right now, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission actually just opened a rulemaking to consider changes to interconnection processes across the country. Hopefully that will have some benefit in New England. Comments in that rulemaking will be due in October of this year. Next slide, please. And on the subject of FERC, my last slide is actually a public notice of a meeting that FERC will be convening on September 8th here in New England, in Burlington, Vermont. FERC will be hosting this meeting in Burlington to discuss the electric and gas system challenges that New England faces. FERC has invited stakeholders to join the meeting to discuss issues, including winter reliability, which I think is really what prompted this discussion. In my view, it's important that clean energy be a part of this conversation, and that the focus not be on, for example, the need for more fossil fuel infrastructure. There will also be a webcast of the meeting, but I don't think that remote participation will actually be enabled. So I think that would be a passive webcast. I would encourage folks to join that conversation if possible. It's also really important to be communicating to state and local representatives that clean reliability resources are a high priority, and that conversely, more investments in fossil fuel resources would be putting good money after bad, whereas investing in those clean reliability resources will really pay off over time. So that, I think, concludes my slides.
Thank you so much for that, Melissa. That was really, really helpful and informative. Thank you so much. So next up, we have Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is a senior project director at the Clean Energy Group and the Clean Energy States Alliance. In these roles, Todd directs the Energy Storage and Technology Advancement Partnership project, which aims to accelerate large-scale electrical energy storage deployment through collaborative efforts with state and federal government agencies, as well as other research partners. Todd also works on CEG's Resilient Power Project and is the CEG and CESA lead for state energy storage policy support. His recent work has focused on virtual power plants and the equitable incorporation of solar plus storage into state clean energy policy and programs. Todd has a master's in environmental policy from Bard College and a BA from Brown University. And with that, I will let you go ahead and take it away, Todd.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay? All right. You could go ahead and advance the slide, please. Thanks for the introduction and for having me. And thank you, Melissa, for the really great presentation. I will just briefly introduce Clean Energy Group, and then I want to talk about, well, I focus on energy storage, and I do a lot of policy work on energy storage, as Logan mentioned. A lot of it has been in Massachusetts over the past few years. And so I'll be kind of focusing on the role of storage in combination with renewables as a cleaner source for winter reliability services. And also on the role of state policy, because as was already stated, ISO New England is a regional organization. It isn't always, its goals and its role are not always aligned with clean energy goals and targets that might be set by states or of interest to groups such as those represented on this call. And that's the way it's set up, and that's what the ISO, the ISO has a specific role to play. But there are things that states can do through policy, program development, and regulation that can really strongly affect what resources end up going into these market programs the ISO runs, even if the ISO doesn't change some of the market rules, which they should and probably will, but we can't always count on that being exactly the way we'd like it to be. So as an introduction, Clean Energy Group is a nonprofit. We are based in Vermont. We work across the country on clean energy programs and policy development, and also on deployment. We are supported by a number of foundations. You can see their logos on the screen there. Go ahead and advance the slide, please. And as I said, I'm the lead for CEG and our sister organization, CESA, on energy storage policy at the state level, where we do a lot of independent analysis. We produce reports. All of this stuff is available freely on our website. You can download anything you want. We've got webinars, webinar archive going back at least 10 years, blogs, filings at dockets, all kinds of things. It's all there on our website. We also work directly with state governments to provide policy and program development support when they're trying to figure out how to stand up a new incentive program or how to value a certain kind of benefit or application for storage or solar or something of that sort. We run a state energy storage working group as in addition to several other working groups focusing on other technologies. And we collaborate a lot with other partners as well, including the national laboratories, DOE, and utilities and others. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, reports, I wanted to point out that there are some that are of particular interest for this topic. The one on the far left is one that we just put out a few months ago on energy storage for winter grid reliability. It specifically looks at this topic in Massachusetts. So that's the one I really recommend. But these other reports are on the Connected Solutions program, battery program in Massachusetts, also quite relevant to this topic. Next slide, please. And again, I don't want to belabor this, but here's I assume you'll get the slides after the presentation. Here's the link for this particular report if you're interested in downloading it. Next slide, please. So ISO New England, as we have already heard, regularly issues warnings such as this headline from the end of 2021 saying that the grid is on edge and rolling blackouts are possible that winter. And yet, New England utilities are not dispatching advanced demand response measures that they already have in place that they've contracted for, such as customer-owned energy storage and also things like demand response resources behind the meter. They're doing it in the summer, but they're not doing it in the winter. Why is this? Next slide, please. Well, here's one big reason that these resources aren't used even though they're in place in the winter. Utilities pay a capacity payment to the ISO each year. It's a lot of money, and it's based on one peak hour each year. So for each individual utilities, I just pick one out of a hat, National Grid, say. They, at the end of the year, the ISO will assess their portion of the overall regional cost of capacity, and that assessment is based on one peak hour of the year. And that peak hour comes in the summer because we're a summer peaking region in New England. And so based on their load, their electric load for their customers during that one peak hour, National Grid will be assessed for their portion of the entire year's capacity cost for the region. And so if they can do anything to reduce the load in their territory during that one peak hour in the summer, they can significantly reduce their capacity cost for the year. They can save a lot of money. However, because the annual capacity cost is assessed based on 1 hour in the summer, peaks in the winter aren't that valuable. So the utility can reduce peaks in the summer, and if they hit that one peak hour, they can save a lot of money. They can reduce peaks in the winter, and they can save a little bit on transmission costs, but they can't affect their capacity cost by reducing winter peaks, because that's not the way the ISO assesses these costs. So effectively, the ISO incentivizes utilities in the region to do everything they can to reduce peaks in the summer, but doesn't provide an incentive for reducing peaks in the winter. So question, are more winter reliability services needed in New England? And if so, why not incentivize customers to provide them? Next slide, please. So as I stated, we recently produced a report on winter reliability in Massachusetts. It was written by a group called Applied Economics Clinic that we contract with to do a lot of this analysis. And here's some of the findings from that report. It turns out that batteries are currently the lowest cost source of new winter reliability services in Massachusetts. So if you look at the little diagram here, the customer cited battery incentives, so that means behind the meter, power walls and so forth, is the red. That is on a $1 per kilowatt hour basis, the cheapest new resource that the utilities can obtain to provide winter reliability services or peaking services. The vertical light blue bar indicates the cost for gas peakers, and the other horizontal darker blue bars show costs for other things like utility scale storage, solar PV plus batteries at the utility scale, and pumped hydro. Next slide, please. So what does this mean? Well, this means a couple of things. One, customers who are buying batteries or leasing batteries and then signing contracts with the utility through the Connected Solutions program for performance payment compensation are being undercompensated for the services they're providing. They're being paid less than any other resource for these services. And again, here's another chart that kind of shows where all these other resources fall on the price scale. So customer programs are cheaper than supply technologies in general, and behind the meter batteries are cheaper than almost anything else you can do to provide winter peaking services or reliability services. The other thing of note is that gas peakers, which are another fairly low-cost resource, aren't viable because of something called the Global Warming Solutions Act, which prohibits new gas peakers from being built in Massachusetts. Now, there's a few that have slipped in under the wire just before the Global Warming Solutions Act came into effect, and those are in development now. But really, there should not be any more gas peakers developed because this puts a cap on emissions. Now, it may be that the ISO steps in and effectively says, no, we need more gas peakers, and we're going to try to overrule that. But as of now, there should not be additional gas peakers developed in the state. Next slide, please. So in the absence of these gas peakers, we really should be incentivizing more battery storage and batteries in combination with solar and wind. So you may well ask, sure, they may be cost effective, but can batteries really replace fossil fuel peakers in terms of the services provided? And the answer is yes. So CEG has something called the Phase Out Peakers Project and has conducted analysis along with our partners in several key states, including Massachusetts, showing that batteries can indeed replace peakers and do it economically. Next slide, please. So here's one key finding, and I chose this one because it looks at a proposed peaker in Peabody. Some of you on the call are going to be familiar with this. This was an analysis done by Trategen for MCAN and CEG. And so what you're seeing here is three alternative solutions. The one on the left is the gas peaker. It's a 60 megawatt proposed peaker, gas peaker. The middle is a 2-hour battery storage solution, and on the right is a 4-hour battery storage solution. And if you look at the net cost, which is the numbers, the dollars there, on the right side of each of this set of bars, you'll see that gas peaker net cost annualized in millions is $7.3 million. The 2-hour battery storage annualized net cost is just a little over 2 million, and the 4-hour battery storage annualized net cost is just under 6 million. So what this is basically showing is that getting the same megawatt hours out of batteries instead of a gas peaker is actually going to be cheaper. This also doesn't include certain other things like the federal investment tax credit. So if you were to, for example, if you were to pair this storage with solar, it would qualify for the tax credit, and then the savings would be even greater. And again, this is available on our website. There's a URL there. You can download the report and take a look. Next slide, please. So all of this is really interesting and cool, and hopefully will give everyone some food for thought. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what our region is going to look like in the future, because winter reliability, whatever its urgency now, is going to be, I think, more urgent as we go into the next couple of decades. One reason for this, as was already stated, is that climate change is a huge driver. But another issue is electrification. So this is a report that was produced by NREL in 2018 called the Electrification Futures Study. And basically what this says is that as you electrify the building sector, grids in the Northeastern United States are going to flip from summer peaking to winter peaking. That means that when I said that peak hour for the year occurs in the summer every year, well, when this flip takes place, that peak hour will then occur in the winter. And you can see on the chart here, this is true not just for Massachusetts, but for the entirety of the Northeastern United States. And the reason for this is kind of obvious if you think about it. If you start heating, everybody starts heating their homes and workplaces with electricity rather than fossil fuels. This has an enormous impact on the electric grid and on generation. And so this is simply just an outcome of saying we're going to need a lot more electricity in the winter than we currently do. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for Massachusetts and other Northeastern states? Well, if you think about it, we have a certain window in which to act before a lot of investment is almost inevitably going to go into building another generation of fossil fuel plants and pipelines. If we don't bring renewables, storage, demand response, and efficiency to scale during that window of opportunity, what's going to happen? Well, the ISO and the utilities are going to say, hey, we're seeing higher and higher peak demand in the winter when there are gas constraints and solar isn't producing a whole lot because it's wintertime. We've got to build a whole much more fossil fuel infrastructure to supply that need. So we need to start planning now to bring renewables and storage online and up to scale. This means we need to start paying clean and distributed resources fairly and competitively in markets and in state incentive programs such as Connected Solutions. If you get the right programs and policies and regulations in place, and this can be done at the state level, renewables and storage can come to scale quickly. And I'm happy to say that Massachusetts is a national leader in this regard. Unfortunately, Massachusetts also has a long way to go. Things to keep in mind. Solar is a great resource, but it's going to contribute less in the winter than it does in the summer. That's just the nature of solar. Offshore wind is going to be critical for winter reliability, and we're going to need longer duration energy storage and more resource aggregation in order to meet the needs of the grid for winter peaking. Right now, energy storage, we can do 2 hours, we can do 4 hours, we can do 6 hours. When you get much beyond that, the cost effectiveness drops off. We are seeing declines in storage costs, manufacturing costs. We need to see a lot more in that regard in order to make long duration storage cost effective. And we also need to find new technologies. Lithium ion batteries are fantastic for short and medium duration use, but for long durations, we're going to need to look to other types of storage technologies. Next slide, please. These are some policy recommendations that came out of the Winter Reliability Report. This is these are specifically for Massachusetts in connection with the Connected Solutions Battery Program. One is that customer battery performance payments should be increased by at least 33%. That would bring them up to parity with the next cheapest source for winter reliability services. Another is that the state and the utilities particularly need to recognize that the value of winter reliability services is not zero. That would seem like a no-brainer, especially given the warnings out of the ISO. And yet, if you look at cost-benefit analysis that the utilities do in these incentive programs like Connected Solutions, typically they do not put a value into the calculation for winter reliability at all. So when you look at something like battery performance payments, they are based on the idea that winter services from those batteries has a value of zero. Why is that? Again, because they can't monetize it very easily, or they just simply don't know what it's worth because there's no market for winter peaking services, and the ISO could change that and should change it. Thirdly, the time to make these positive changes is now. Again, before we see a huge investment in new fossil infrastructure. And I could add to this a fourth recommendation that low-income equity programs really need to be incorporated into Connected Solutions and all of these state incentive programs and clean energy programs much more effectively than they are currently. Next slide, please. That's it for me. So I will turn it back over to Logan.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'm already seeing questions come in. So I will be fairly short in my remarks. I just want to kind of go back to a lot of what Melissa and what Todd mentioned. I think it's very clear that there are steps that need to be taken. And when we think about it both on a statewide level, there are clear steps that Todd just outlined. When we think about it on a regional level, there are clear actions and reforms that need to be made. Based on MCAN's theory of change and based on what we've seen as effective, we know that in order to be successful in implementing those changes, we need to have the experts in the room. We need to have the attorneys, continuing to do what they do. We also need residents. We also need advocates. We also need folks who are on the ground in their towns, in their communities to take action. And I mentioned before that ISO New England is not necessarily governed by the states. That is true, but they are influenced by the states. When the Attorney General knows that issues of clean winter reliability are important to residents, they're more inclined to act on our behalf and in our best interest. When the managers and the elected officials know that we want more of this and that we're informed and we're engaged, they will be more inclined to act in our best interest. Similarly, I know there are a lot of people on the, in municipal utility communities on this call. Municipal utilities have perhaps outsized influence in some of the conversations because of where they sit in the regulatory process and in the, maybe not regulatory, but in NEPOOL. And so making sure that residents are engaging on these issues, with their municipal utilities, with their local elected officials, will be critical to ensuring that we are effective in cleaning and greening our winter reliability approach. So I just want to highlight that, and I want to highlight not necessarily a direct action now, but a long-term ask and really kind of where we should all think about moving. And that is continue to stay involved, continue to stay informed, and continue to take action. And one of the best ways that residents and advocates can do that is by joining a coalition called the Fix the Grid Coalition. And the description is up here on the page, so I won't go through it. But this is really an incredibly important way. We need folks to stay involved if we're going to be successful in implementing change and ensuring that our grid is working for our best interest and is working and, maybe not even working, maybe just adequate in the legal requirements that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has to be net zero by 2050. So stay involved. The Fix the Grid Coalition is a great opportunity and a great way to do that. This group meets bi-weekly on Monday at 2:30 p.m. If you're interested in joining, I know they are on the call. Please email Mireille Bijani from Slingshot, and their email is listed right here. I cannot emphasize how important it is for residents to continue to show up to events like this, to continue to take action. It will be a critical part to our decarbonization of the grid that serves the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the 5 other New England states. So that's all I have to say for now. I do want to open things up for a brief Q&A, and I saw that there were some questions that were already coming in through the chat. So let me just escape. Sorry. Let me escape there. And I saw that there were questions that were already showing up in the chat. I will go first to a question that Jerry raised. How much new reliable clean energy is needed to handle the reliability program, and I guess winter reliability writ large, and how much wind is coming in line? Will that be sufficient when we look at the numbers? Will that be sufficient in at least in meeting reliability to a large part? And I'll pass it over to whoever wants to take it first, Todd or Melissa.
Okay, let's see. So I cannot answer the question. That's the short answer. How much? First of all, it's a good question to research. Second of all, what the reliability problem is. I mean, we're assuming there is a reliability problem. ISO New England certainly has raised some flags, but we've never actually seen a reliability problem. However, as Todd mentioned, this is something that may become, if it's not real now, it may become more real in future years because we are going to have electrification placing new demands on the grid during the winter time. However, we're also, making other changes in transmission. So we'll see. But in terms of, what clean resources would be helpful, it really, how much solar you would need depends on how much storage you have and, various factors. So it's that, again, that portfolio that you need to put together. And then in terms of wind, we have a whole bunch of offshore wind that will hopefully come online, and hopefully after that, that's one of the reasons why I emphasize the need for transmission. and action at the state level, but also the regional level to support that. Wind by itself will not solve a winter reliability problem, but it will help a lot because it blows really strong in the winter. It provides a local resource. It doesn't have this kind of volatility. There are all sorts of good things about wind in the winter, but by itself, it's not a snap your fingers and you're done kind of thing. So Todd may have.
Sure. Yeah, I also don't know that I can answer the question, but I can rephrase it in a way that might be helpful. Winter reliability is just the term that's used to distinguish winter peaking services from summer peaking services. So in the summer, there's a capacity market, and we talk about peaking capacity, the need for peaking capacity. Because there's no comparable market or auction that looks at the peaks in the winter, they call it winter reliability. The question really, I would think of it more this way, not so much what's the size of the problem, but what do we need to do to start to meet the peaks in a way that relies more and more on clean resources. And so whether they're summertime peaks or wintertime peaks. For winter in particular, it's a difficult issue because, as I said, that solar is going to be producing less in the winter. So we need to come up with some other solutions. But in terms of just generally meeting peaks, there's no reason that you can't. There's all kinds of resources you can use to meet peaks. And if you look at some of the one of the early charts I showed, we have an excess capacity built into the system because we don't want to ever have blackouts. So that excess capacity is designed to meet the highest peak we might possibly see. And so what we have is, in reality, a lot of idle capacity that most of the year does nothing on the grid. So there's a lot of idle, overbuilt grid capacity. And if we can start to reduce the peaks and level out the curve for demand, we can then reduce the amount of excess capacity we need to have. And storage is a great resource for that because you can shift demand from high demand periods to lower demand periods and shift production. So that's overall what I would like to see is that we start to level out the demand curve in the region.
Great. Thank you so much. And I think I think we'll maybe take two more questions, but one more that kind of tacks onto this. And it was one of the many questions that Judith asked. And it kind of gets to, when we talk about winter reliability specifically, how much of a risk is scaling up renewables too quickly? Is that a risk that we should be taking seriously? It sounds like ISO New England, might voice that as a concern. Renewables come on too fast, and then we're left with no reliability. Is that a reasonable concern, or maybe we can answer this quickly? No, it's not a reasonable concern, and it's kind of scare tactics more than anything.
Well, I mean, the pace is not really relevant so much as the portfolio. Again, I may keep going back to that. If you have clean reliability solutions, which is why we're having this conversation, then you'll have clean reliability. It's building up those investments through having the right incentives, through having the right programs in place that you will ensure that you can do it more quickly. So that's really the focus.
Yeah, I mean, if magically tomorrow every fossil resource was replaced by solar in the region, would we have a problem if we didn't have a bunch of storage to make that solar dispatchable? Yeah, probably. That's not going to happen. it would be a nice problem to have, actually. If we, I mean, there have been a couple of examples. I'm thinking like Hawaii, I think was one where there was a lot of solar put onto the grid fairly quickly, and they fairly quickly realized that they needed a lot of storage. The issue is that you can't dispatch variable resources like wind and solar, so you do need storage to make it more dispatchable. Certainly solve the problem.
Great. Yeah, that was my assumption, but it's good to hear it from the experts. I'll close with this, which is kind of more a theory of change question, and a question about kind of how we can, make change in this system. And it comes from Ian, and it talks about concern about, industry capture, maybe kind of slowing down ISO New England's progress, and by extension, NEPOL's decision making. I want to kind of extend that out to, as experts in this, how would you advise, advocates to get involved? Is there a priority, or any recommendations that you all have about how we can best influence ISO New England's regional policies? And I know that's a big question, so, do with it what you will.
Well, you could certainly try to influence ISO New England. I have not. Sure, you can try to influence them directly. You could probably do a little bit better by trying to get the state to weigh in with the ISO. The ISO doesn't always do what states would like. In fact, there was a coalition of New England governors that came out with a letter basically saying that they wanted the ISO to do things differently, be a little bit more respectful of state clean energy programs and targets. It's not clear to me that the ISO is necessarily going to respond to that kind of thing too much. I would really target change at the state level. There's so much that states can do. I mean, you look at, I'll take Connected Solutions again as an example, because I've been very involved with it over the last few years, well, since its inception, really. I mean, it's a tiny program within one of the nation's largest energy efficiency budgets. If you compare it with neighboring states, look at Connecticut. They have a 9-year, 580 megawatt customer energy storage program. It's enormous compared to Connected Solutions. California, SGIP program, hugely funded, very successful over a lot of years. Look at here, in Vermont, just one utility, Green Mountain Power, has 3,000 customers with batteries behind the meter that they dispatch to hit these peaks. If you compare it with Massachusetts could be doing a lot more. And I think if people would come out, there's an EEAC meeting coming up next week. They're going to talk about equity participation in Connected Solutions. Those meetings are open. Come out and talk about, submit comments and come to them and attend the meetings. They're virtual. You can sign up to be a speaker. That's what I would suggest. And Melissa, you may have other ideas.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, Todd is right that it is hard to influence ISO New England directly, but the states can. I think Logan also mentioned this. The states can influence ISO New England. Acadia Center is a member of the stakeholder advisory body that ISO New England consults and that advises ISO New England on its proposals. We're one of many stakeholders, and I am Acadia Center's representative to the stakeholder advisory body, which is called NEPOL. So I engage directly with Acadia Center, but I have one of the things that I've with ISO New England. But one of the things that I've been advocating for is better ways for more people to engage, not just organizations that have a lot of expertise or time or resources. Obviously the well-funded energy companies are the ones who have the most of those things, even among the needful folks like us. But what about everybody else? One of the problems is that needful, these stakeholder meetings are done in secrecy. I can't even tell you exactly what they say at these meetings, which is a real problem. How are you going to have accountability and transparency? ISO New England says, oh, that's NEPL's role, we didn't make it. But ISO New England could put its down or could create additional meetings that are meaningful for the public, but it hasn't done that. So, I am looking to partner with community-based groups and with others so that I can serve as a proxy. And I know that others like MCAN are seeking to help serve as a proxy for those voices as well, for environmental justice groups, for community groups, to bring those voices into the conversation, even though they are currently excluded. States, talking to your elected representatives, super important. Not only because they can do things at the state level, but because they do have influence over ISO New England. They wish they had more, but they are in fact having more, in part because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is starting to tell them to listen more to the states. So that is an important shift, and we should take advantage of it. Get your elected representatives' ear and tell them what your priorities are and how ISO New England should act. And as part of that, Acadia Center has asked ISO New England recently to incorporate into all of its proposals, reforms of the energy markets, all its major proposals, an assessment of how those proposals will impact state policy. Number one, state policy on decarbonization. Number two, state policy on consumer costs. And number three, state policy on environmental justice. And so we've asked them to, take that step to improve accountability and transparency so that we can have an honest conversation about what impacts ISO New England's policies and programs are having on those really critical, things that are going on at the state level and are being stymied by, barriers at the regional level. We need to be able to remove those barriers, but we also need that open conversation in order to make it happen. So I encourage you to talk to your state officials. I encourage you to submit comments directly to ISO New England whenever possible. We don't have forums for that. They claim that they're going to try to create more. We'll see. Those comments to increase accountability and transparency can help to crack open that nut that currently is really hard to get beyond. I mean, there's a lot of barriers to direct participation right now. And so we're hoping to change that. Please reach out if I can help with serving as a proxy.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing. There are programs that are being run by Massachusetts state energy agencies and by utilities that essentially do an end run around the ISO's market programs and policies. So things like connected solutions, things like the Clean Peak Standard, demand response programs, EV charging programs, all of these things, the more utilities are purchasing peaking services from customers through these kinds of programs, the less they need to purchase from fossil fuel peakers. I mean, it's a zero-sum game. There's a certain amount of capacity that you need, and the more these programs are feeding capacity into the system from clean resources, the less is going to get purchased from dirty resources. So, support these programs are good, but they need to be improved. They need to be expanded. The budgets need to be made bigger. The targets need to be raised. They're kind of almost like little pilot programs at this point. They need to be made, scaled up into serious market changing programs. So I would just encourage you to kind of look at what actually is there, what the potential of it is, and to encourage the state to really put its money where its mouth is with regard to these the clean resource incentive programs and targets that are already in place.
Great. Those are both really, all of those suggestions are very helpful. And this whole conversation has been really, really informative. Thank you both, Melissa and Todd, for all of the insight that you provided us. I'm conscious that it is 7:20, so I want to be respectful of everyone's evening and everyone's time. Thank you all so much for joining us. This will not be the last conversation on the grid and ISO New England that MCAN has, but I hope that it has been useful to explain why winter reliability is something we should be paying attention to, and what steps we might want to look at for taking action. And staying engaged is the number one and first priority to make sure that we are addressing these challenges. So thank you both, Melissa and Todd, again. This was really great. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their evening. Thank you so much.